Okay, pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing, O Lord, in your sight. Amen. Okay, lightning round. Are you ready? We're this is a good start. 3 weeks. We're 3 weeks into the narrative lectionary. So we have witnessed God's creation of the physical world, rounded off with the creation and sanctification of holy time or Sabbath, a time that's not just for the absence of labor or the cessation of labor, but rather filled with the celebration of and gratitude for creation itself, a sanctuary in time. Then last week, we jumped into the middle of Genesis with the story of Abraham and his special promised boy, Isaac. And Abraham is a foundational figure, in the understanding of the biblical stories. This is why we keep coming back to stories about Abraham every year in the narrative lectionary. He and Sarah are the first humans with whom God makes a promise, a deal, a pact, a contract. It's spelled out in Genesis 12, but it echoes throughout the entirety of the Bible. If you're newer to Knox, this is like a 12-year running joke. Just if I ask a question, the answer is probably Genesis 12. Or Jesus, if it's after Christmas. But this echoes throughout the entirety of the Bible. I will be your God, you will be my people, I will bless you with descendants and land, and I will bless you so that through you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Here in the early years of the covenant, the focus seems to be on that first part, descendants. Abe and Sarah are well into their 80s when they make covenant with God, and they are entirely childless and well past their procreating best before date. So the whole notion of having kids at this point seems silly. When they do bear a child, Sarah names him Isaac, which means laughter. Isaac grows up and marries Rebekah, an absolute powerhouse of a woman. And we will get to that another day. She's phenomenal. And together, they too experience a worrying amount of infertility, until finally, after about 20 years, Bex falls pregnant. Here's the rub. This family exists during a time that is dominated by a concept called primogeniture. There's your $50 word for the day. It refers to a belief that the right of succession belongs to the firstborn child, usually the eldest son. Well, wouldn't you know it, God allows it to happen that Bex gets pregnant with twins. Just can't make this easy for himself. Furthermore, the twins invent the modern genre known as the World Wrestling Entertainment while in utero, and then spend every living, breathing moment irritating each other after they're born. Charming. In a previous sermon on the topic, I referenced a biblical commentary podcast that compared Esau and Jacob. Where are my comic book nerds? Marvel Comics, Thor and Loki, right? And Thor is Esau and Loki is Jacob. Brothers who do love each other, but absolutely can't help but drive each other and their parents crazy. But what starts as childhood shenanigans quickly turns more problematic as the twins get older. The pranks come with higher stakes. Wanting for himself the blessing and birthright rightfully belonging to his brother, who is only a few minutes older than him, Jacob hatches a plan to dupe his brother out of both. This grieves his father and enrages his brother. When we come to the scene today, Jacob is literally on the run. He knows that if he stays at home, Esau is going to tear him limb from limb. And rightly so. Jacob stole from him his whole future, his whole promise, his blessing, his inheritance, his position and prominence in the family, in the tribe, and in the community. Jacob was a dead man walking. So his mama, who always favored Jacob anyway, as a side note, not that I'm a parenting expert, but it is never a good idea, parents, to pick favorites. It is especially not a good idea to vocalize it if you do have a favorite. Just keep that to yourself. It ends well 0% of the time. Just keep a lid on it, okay? Anyway, Rebecca sends her favorite special boy to her brother's house to lay low. Here's another cool parenting tip. Maybe don't send your son who has a proclivity for trickery and deception to live with their uncle who basically wrote the handbook on fraud. It wouldn't be an easy time for Jacob under Uncle Laban's thumb. He doesn't know it yet, but Jacob will actually have to match wits and then outwit his uncle if he hopes to come out on top. And you thought your family was dysfunctional. Today's reading lands between these two realities. Jacob is a dead man walking, or running, rather, and he is on his way to a workhouse, and he doesn't know it. Yeah, sure, he now had the birthright of the firstborn. He had the blessing of Abraham and Isaac, but wowee, did it ever come at a high price. Esau's promise to kill him as soon as their dad kicked the bucket fuels this cheater's mad dash for safety. And ironically, this has meant abandoning the very inheritance, the land and grain and new wine that he and his mama had hustled out of Isaac. And his destination, not especially safe either. His uncle Laban was a known deceiver and a hard taskmaster himself, which Jacob would soon discover. Biblical scholar Bruce Waltke lays it out, describing Jacob as being situated between a death camp and a hard labor camp. He's in no man's land, out in the wild, in enemy territory, without kith or kin for protection, no snacks, and now it's getting dark. The time when nocturnal predators come out to play with unsuspecting prey. Wildcats, bears, hyenas. Now comes the danger of dusk's shadows and night's darkness. Exhausted to the bone, Jacob lies down. Our modern translation describe it that he used a rock for a pillow, but it's actually more likely that he curled up beneath a larger rock for some kind of meager protection from predators who would easily make a midnight snack of his prone body. How he managed to sleep at all is a wonder. Would he even survive to enjoy the fruits of his deceitful labor? Okay, I've set the scene, and now I want to pause for a second. I want to talk about a concept you've likely heard, probably used it. Maybe you've had it wielded against you. A stone fist inside a velvet glove. Tell me, have you ever heard the term hitting rock bottom? The origin of the idiom is related to the idea of a miner who has dug deep into the earth and reached the very bottom layer of rock. The phrase has been in use in English since at least the mid-20th century, and it's been applied to a wide range of situations, including personal and financial struggles, addiction, and mental health issues. In general, the phrase is used to describe a situation where someone has experienced a significant and often painful setback, and where they are at the lowest point in their life, with little hope of improvement. One might make the connection then that Jacob had hit rock bottom that night as he tucked himself beneath or around a stone for protection. No food, no home, no family, and no guarantee he'd even wake up alive the next morning. Rock bottom. Some of you know my family, and you've had the blessing of meeting my brother,
who often comes to play the piano for Lent or Advent recitals. He's quite talented, but don't tell him I told you so. He's also finishing up his Master's of Social Work, top of his class, and he will begin a new job soon for a specialized addiction services agency, which provides a broad scope of services to individuals, families, and communities experiencing harm related to substance use. He will be working as a group facilitator, supporting clients attending the residential addiction treatment program through the facilitation of psychoeducational groups, including relapse prevention and life skills. You can imagine the lighthearted conversations he and I have around the family table. Though I am a Christian minister and he is a staunch agnostic, we both find common ground in our love and care for people, especially people on the margins. Indeed. The term rock bottom has come up many times in our conversations, both directly and indirectly. Nearly all of us, have heard the notion somewhere along the way that sometimes people just need to hit a rock bottom before being willing to change their behavior. And nearly none of us have escaped being socially indoctrinated into the idea that in order to best support somebody who is, for example, living with addiction, we must move out of the way to allow for their inevitable fall to hit rock bottom. We've been told that to do otherwise would mean enabling the person to continue with their addiction or their questionable life choices. Do you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Remember that old chestnut where self-actualization is sort of the top, that's what we're gunning for, but at the bottom is just like food and water and shelter, right? And as a person, we want to move upwards in the hierarchy of needs. The dominant belief that was that for some people, it was as if they had to go without having their basic needs met in order to reach living up to their potential. Just skipping the whole middle part, that somehow going without food or shelter or safety would motivate them to self-actualize. One could argue that Jacob had hit rock bottom. Thankfully, and hey, church, pay attention here. In the world of recovery, this belief has been utterly refuted. The concept of rock bottom as a motivator for recovery does not work and has been a poisonous source of tremendous unnecessary harm, the most tragic of which continues to be countless preventable deaths. And I'd like to chime in as a spiritual leader and theologian to add that it is neither faithful nor biblical to promote rock bottom beliefs. Let me show you why. The author of Genesis tells us that Jacob the trickster, Jacob the liar, Jacob the ne'er-do-well, Jacob the heel, had come to a certain place and he stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and laid down in that place, and he dreamed that there was a stairway set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it between heaven and earth, and the Lord stood beside him. This moment was the turning point for Jacob, but not because he was starving, not because he was homeless, not because he had no family or friends. The reason this moment changed his life was because in the midst of his tribulation, he got to see that he wasn't alone. He had not been abandoned to that rock. That heaven and earth were connected by a great highway of angelic messengers. Imagine what he would have thought of the great cloud of witnesses. And what's even better, God was there, not up top, not up there looking down on him like some disappointed judge, but literally right beside him. the Lord stood beside him in that place. Church, what would it look like if instead of watching someone hit rock bottom, we stood beside them? It doesn't erase the choices they've made or fix their struggles. It doesn't ask us to fix things for them, to clear all the barriers so that they don't have to struggle with the consequences. What if we just stood beside them and pointed out the legion of angels around them and reassured them that even in this dark night of the soul, they are not alone? My favorite psalm is 139. Sometimes I call it the Big Brother psalm because God is always present. It's giving George Orwell. And it's in it, the psalmist is like, where can I go to flee from your presence? Where can I go that you are not already there? You cannot tell me that God was not already standing in that place where that rock for a pillow would be before Jacob even got there. And don't get me wrong, Jacob was not reformed that day, okay? Like, let's be so for real. He did not clean up his act 100%. He literally messes up the very next day. On a high from his dream the night before, he makes a monument to God and then immediately sets up a bargain between him and the divine. Hey, God, if you provide a clear path for me, you can totally be my God and I'll be your people. Testing God's faithfulness to him. Good grief, Jacob. As if you are any picture of loyalty and fealty. Jacob continues to proverbially stub his toe. He's still going to make questionable choices and fall into old patterns of deceit and trickery. He is far from perfect. He reminds me a bit of Peter, right? Jesus' buddy. Jacob is far from perfect, and honestly, his heart isn't even always in the right place. He's got some really good qualities, but also he's pretty flawed. He's human, like you and I, right? And all the people that we know and love. He is messy and tragic and beautiful, just like all of us. What happened in that moment to change the course of Jacob's life while he slept alone on a rock was not the motivation of starvation, dehydration, homelessness. It wasn't even a desire to grab a rung of that angelic ladder and start climbing, as if the drive of achievement and ascension would finally get his head in the game. Just need some wins. No, what changed Jacob's life was discovering that God stood beside him, right in the midst of that barren, destitute place. What changed his life wasn't the rock on which he laid his head, but the reassurance of connection and belonging. You are mine, Jacob, and I am your God. What brings people closer to living a life of meaning and beauty and purpose isn't letting them suffer and fall into isolation or shame them into change. Genesis 28 is telling us very clearly something about the character of God, that this is the God who sees us and stands beside us, even in our worst moments, even when we've done this to ourselves, and we have no one else to blame but ourselves. And we are invited, then, to do the same for one another. What if we rebuked the notion of letting one another hit rock bottom and instead practiced radical grace? Fanning self-worth onto one another as children of God and standing in the way of a culture, a narrative of shame, disdain, judgment, and isolation. What does it say about the witness of the Christian church in the West that this is not the first place people turn? when they feel like they are really in the thick of it. What has our witness been, church? That we have not presented ourselves as a warm, gracious, loving institution in the world. We have work to do. We have work to do. That's all. In the parable of the prodigal son in Luke 15, Jesus talks about how the younger son pulled a Jacob by taking his inheritance before it was owed to him. He went into the city, squandered it, made questionable choices, and his life went downhill fast. When he makes a choice to return to his father's home, prepared to take one on the chin and live like a servant, his father sees him from far off and runs to him and throws his arms around his boy in a rib-crushing hug of reconciliation. Do you know why the father was so ready to do that? Because every day he went out looking for his boy. Every day he was ready to stand beside him. It wasn't a fluke. It was the character of the Father. Because what matters is connection and belonging. When you're standing there empty, heartbroken, smelling like the pig pen with nothing but a rock for a pillow, it turns out that the God of creation is already there beside you, whether you realized it or not. And likely the divine has thrown their arms around you in a rib-crushing hug. Last week, Abraham had to learn that God could be trusted to keep God's promises without the need to take matters into our own hands, to manipulate the circumstances, to control the outcome. God doesn't require bloodshed in order to secure God's faithfulness. This week, Abraham's grandson learns that no matter how far we go, no matter how many wrong turns we take, no matter if we struggle with deceit or addiction or anger or gambling or spending or gossiping or hoarding, it turns out God is still standing right beside us, reminding us that we actually do belong and we actually are beloved. And those things aren't dependent on us, but they come from the benevolent heart of a loving God who is unapologetically, even recklessly, for us. And so may we learn a little more about this God who stands beside us, and may we practice how to do that a little better for the people around us. Maybe especially the people that society might think haven't earned it. May we speak against the toxic narratives of rock bottom and instead embody acts of radical grace and hospitality and solidarity. God didn't intervene and fix the problems that Jacob had created for himself. But knowing that this God of his father and grandfather was with him, and knowing that the veil between earth and heaven is thin, and that he was surrounded by a community of godly messengers, Jacob was able to take steps in his own life towards rebuilding, reconciling, repairing. I mean, in the end, not to do a spoiler here, but he does end up with 4 wives and 13 kids and more wealth than you could shake a stick at. The guy does okay for himself. But the turning point wasn't rock bottom. The turning point was connection. Church, may we collectively and individually be ambassadors of connection in our own lives. To God be all the glory. Amen.